Welcome to the Wunderkammer, the place where you will find all the needed objects in order to discover yourself. But be careful, this cabinet of curiosities will uncover things you never wanted to see unveiled. This room will open the abyss of darkness for you. You will see how this darkness will lead you to the light you were searching for all this time. Wunderkammer is excited to be your guide to that light.
There are so many moments when the pain feels so great that we can't describe it with words. That's when, in those moments, art, poetry, and music exist. Through many years, art remained as the reminder and memory of the pain we felt. These are the imprints of so many people, and therefore so much pain. So what part of the pain is the hardest? It's the grief that we all carry, the grief of so much loss that it makes us want to be rather dead than alive. Understanding grief brings us close to the brink of insanity, where we see things that are beyond describable. We stop speaking and instead we just create and channel directly from our soul. We stop describing and instead we just create the direct reflection of what we're feeling. Creating and feeling becomes our new form of communication, the new form of describing and feeling and experiencing. Because we understand that words can become a limit, and no matter how much you use them, you will always feel misunderstood and lonely in your own reality. Paul Nash is one of these people. He is not a prophet, genius, or special. He is just another person who is suffering so much that art becomes his only salvation. Art becomes his only way of making his pain bearable enough to live. If you haven't noticed, there are many people like Paul among us who feel the same way and who act the same way. According to what's written about him, quote, Paul Nash was a British surrealist painter and war artist, as well as a photographer, writer, and designer of applied art. Nash was among the most important landscape artists of the first half of the 20th century. He played a key role in the development of modernism in English art. He was the older brother of the artist John Nash. Born in London, Nash grew up in Buckinghamshire, where he developed a love of the landscape. He entered the Slade School of Art but was poor at figure drawing and concentrated on landscape painting. Nash found much inspiration in landscapes with elements of ancient history, such as burial mounds, Iron Age hill forts such as Whittenham Clumps, and the standing stones at Avebury in Wiltshire. The artworks he produced during World War I are among the most iconic images of the conflict. After the war, Nash continued to focus on landscape painting, originally in a formalized decorative style, but throughout the 1930s in an increasingly abstract and surreal manner. In his paintings, he often placed everyday objects into a landscape to give them a new identity and symbolism. He produced 2 series of anthropomorphic depictions of aircraft before producing a number of landscapes rich in symbolism with an intense mystical quality. They have perhaps become among the best-known works from that period. Nash was also a fine book illustrator and also designed stage scenery, fabrics, and posters. Unquote. He lives in a period when there are so many rapid changes going on in history, just like the year when this picture was taken by Landscape King in 1937. This is when there are many political changes in Britain, where George VI becomes the king, and Edward is crowned and becomes the Duke of Windsor, and Neville becomes the Prime Minister. This is also the year when Picasso's Guernica is on tour and shows the horror of war. And these are the years when art is needed as a reminder of all the chaos and trauma that is happening all around the world. Humanity is basically drowning in war. That's something that doesn't change even today. Commercial airship travel is brought to an end with the Hindenburg disaster.
Flames now, and the flame is crashing to the ground, not quite to the mooring mast. All the humanity and all the passengers screaming around it. Worst thing I've ever witnessed.
The German airship exploded while landing in New Jersey. Radio broadcaster Herbert Morrison's reaction has become legendary. Oh, the humanity. Horror is happening in Asia as well. Japan invades China. Japanese troops committed numerous atrocities against soldiers and civilians in what became known as the Rape of Nanking. According to information from the Imperial War Museum curator Alexandra Walton, quote, "At the outbreak of war, Paul Nash enlisted in the army and he was posted to Ypres in Belgium in early 1917, but after an injury from a fall returned to England a few months later. He was keen to become an official war artist, writing in July that he was prompted by an idea and goaded on by John, his brother, from behind, to inquire about a permit or a special license to draw in the line and facility for seeing all the different sectors." In one of the letters that he wrote to his wife, Margaret Nash, while on commission to make drawings at the front as a war artist, he wrote, "I am a messenger who will bring back word from the men who are fighting to those who want the war to go on forever. Feeble, inarticulate will be my message, but it will have a bitter truth, and may it burn their lousy souls." Unquote. This is the period when the British artist at the front was initiated. This was an attempt to bring the works of the war artist to the middle-class audience. And one of such series that were dedicated to Paul Nash were published by Country Life. One of the featured works was We Are Making a New World, painted in 1917. This work depicts the damage caused to the landscape of the Western Front and how the sun enriches a devastated place. The title itself mocks the idea and ambitions of the war and shows the nature of human devastation. Quote, "In 1918, Nash was one of the several artists commissioned to create a large painting by the British War Memorials Committee for a new scheme to create a grand hall of remembrance. It was to be filled with paintings by British artists that were devoted to fighting subjects, home subjects, and the war at sea and in the air. Nash produced The Men in Road, 1919, which was originally to have been called A Flanders Battlefield. The Hall of Remembrance scheme was intended to provide a permanent artistic memorial for the First World War in Britain. Other artists commissioned included John Singer Sargent, Wyndham Lewis, and Stanley Spencer. However, at the end of the First World War, the Treasury forced the closure of the scheme and the paintings were transferred to IWM." Unquote. He was also the official war artist in the Second World War, and this is when he developed the fascination of aircrafts as the central focus of the war. This got him into surrealism in the following years, and this can be seen in the 1942 Vogue article titled The Personality of Planes, where he explains the anthropomorphic vision of these machines. Even though because of his asthma he never flew, he was able to observe planes up close. His paintings, which are depicting aircrafts and soldiers from the Second World War, show the emotion and terror of war. His sketches either depict a paradise that he imagined or a hell that he went through and saw with his very own eyes. Just like this painting, Trees in Bird Garden, Ivor Heath, that he painted in 1913. Its softness and light colors remind me of a utopia, a place where there is peace and serenity, a place where we can breathe. There are many other paintings as well that depict this kind of utopia that we all dream of but can never see. On the other side, we have paintings representing hell, paintings of burnt trees, howitzers firing, craters, burnt forests, and pure doom. Paul Nash didn't paint dramatic paintings, he painted the reality that he lived in. An artist always either paints their dreams or their own hell. We live in a world that it's either one or none. And because of the reality of this world, we always build new worlds to escape to because of this unbearable suffering. We attach our wires to our dreams and never let go of them. We build our own spring because of the terrifyingly cold winter. Paul Nash has amazing photographs that depict his trauma even more. Some historic aspects are quoted here. Quote, "Paul Nash took photographs for the last 16 years of his life. That is to say, from 1930 when he was given an American Kodak. The camera was adequate to his purpose, and he never became involved enough in the technique of photography to buy himself a more elaborate one or bother with wide angle or other lenses or even to use a tripod. But his snapshots were neither indiscriminate nor trigger happy. As in everything, he was as professional as he needed to be. If he wanted to take something and the sun was not out, he would wait for it. If he wanted a shadow at a certain angle, he would wait for it. He would stalk the Uffington White Horse or Maiden Castle or the stones at Avebury until the place and the light were right, and his friends who drove him would have to wait and stalk too. It was often anxious for them and difficult for him, since he was seldom well, and that kind of effort and concentration was exhausting. Paul had an economical and obsessive eye, and his new toy at once became a valuable weapon. The very first photographs that he took on the way to the United States related to the preoccupations of his painting. A ship's mast and rigging was a slender echo and anticipation of the open cage structure he often used. The complicated interplay of hard edges and hollowed shadows within the curve of a lifeboat claimed his interest in the mystery of ordinary things seen from unordinary angles. No one could have been a less doctrinaire or literary surrealist, but he had a puning vision which, with his aptitude for analog, made his instinctive reaction to the world very close to the more self-conscious and sophisticated surrealist one. His wit with the camera was a natural extension of the wittiness of his words and of his attitude of life. He loved to see the funny side of things without being destructive, so the objects that he photographed at Swanage, for example, for his article Seaside Surrealism, absurd concrete seats, huge pretentious lamp standards, 3 concrete steps isolated in a bed of pebbles, all have a double life of incongruity and of beauty. While on the one hand he used his photographs as immediate aids, memoir to pin down a fleeting glimpse of the famous Genoswoche, or to record the particular lie of a dead tree or a shadow on a wall, on the other hand, he recorded aspects of the countryside that he was never tempted to paint directly, but which he translated into the magic of his painting. Stone upon stone and miles of dry stone wall, the endless meeting and parting of furrows in an enormous field, layers of cork drying, stacked and roofed like rows of stone fishing huts, the invisible but eloquent bones of a landscape under stretches of featureless grass, all these ancient repetitions, natural or man-made, extend the more immediate subjects of his work and give them their timeless quality. Paul Nash always had a feeling for the horizontal, at once boundless and embracing, and this is especially noticeable in his photographs. His Kodak, whether by chance or intention, took an exceptionally wide picture, but he always expected things to work for him, and they usually did." Unquote. His photographs of dead trees is how I actually discovered Paul Nash, and what actually caught me off guard is the emotion of hopelessness that just drew me into his creation, and it's something that all of us feel. Paul managed to capture a somatic sensation that cannot be explained, a somatic sensation of grief, sorrow, and powerlessness. It's as if the artist was weeping when he made all of these photographs. Walton adds this commentary about the photographs, quote, "Nash surrounded himself with photographs of these beautiful monsters, becoming familiar with the characters of the different British warplanes. He also took many photographs of wrecked German aircraft at Cowley Dump, which he used as a source material for his painting Totes Meer, 1940 till 1941. Totes Meer is German for Dead Sea. Nash envisaged the piles of salvaged German aircraft as a sea of dead creatures, which seemed to him to pitch and churn when bathed in moonlight. Totes Meer also provides a great example of how exploring archival material alongside his paintings can provide a deeper understanding of Nash the artist and the man. With its depiction of defeated Nazi bombers amid the Blitz years, it was intended to boost patriotic sentiment. However, its melancholy air also suggests another more personal interpretation, centering on Nash's relationship with the artist Eileen Agar. The affair had ended some years before the war, but Nash continued correspondence with Agar. His letters in the Tate Archive reveal how Nash likened their love to flight, and a comparison of the end of the relationship with a sea of grounded aircraft is compelling." Unquote. The reason why I consider him as one of the best trauma artists is because he successfully shared an emotion that is meant to awaken and touch all of us. It's as if he is a part of our collective consciousness that serves as a reminder of the origin of emotion. To know more about the origin of emotion, you can watch my documentary of Land of the Lustrous, where I slowly get into the origin of emotion and explore its depths. Florence Hallett has a beautiful commentary of some of Paul's paintings. Quote, "Large scale and painted in oil, Nash's war paintings announce their dramatic change of tone as much through medium as through subject matter. and yet for all their engagement with the horrors of the war, combining the symbolic with the harshly descriptive, heightened by a fracturing of space reminiscent of the Vorticists, Nash's war paintings retain firm links with his earlier pictures. In The Maiden Road, 1919, the landscape is peopled with ranks of broken trees, the very surface of the earth transformed and devastated by rain-filled bomb holes. The pair of soldiers in the middle ground are almost incidental, and while the ranks of disfigured and half-dead trees suggest the battered bodies of soldiers, the truth is that the ravaged landscape, always capable of regenerating, has more vigor than the flesh and blood of these wretched men. In Spring in the Trenches, Ridgewood, 1917-1918, Nash contrasts a group of listless soldiers with a backdrop of thickened, budding nature, cruelly indifferent to their suffering. Any message of hope is undermined by the strangeness of this encounter and the interaction between conflicting realities, and the disruption of landscapes by objects that jar and don't fit would become an increasingly dominant theme for Nash in the interwar years." Unquote. I'm going to finish this video with the beautiful essay from Simon Granti, published in the Tate magazine issue 6, who accurately captures the traumatic life of the artist and how he symbolizes all the people who went through the trauma of that period of history. Paul Nash was preoccupied with his own mortality from childhood, but being posted as official artist to both world wars inspired him to some of his greatest work. When Paul Nash died in 1946, he was fondly remembered as a great landscape painter, a modern keeper of an old English tradition in which the country's character was depicted in the calm of every branch, brook and rolling hill. When he had his memorial exhibition at the Tate Gallery in 1948, distinguished reviewers of the show variously described him as an exceedingly English artist, a native genius who understood his England in terms of Blake's Albion, and a man with Wordsworthian intuition. However, beneath his quiet lyrical pastoralism was a much darker side, reflected in his lifelong preoccupation with the theme of mortality. While his love for landscape gave him his subject, it was the spectre of death that gave him his spirit. This was a sentiment that appeared throughout his career, from his early experiments with Romanticism. It was radically transformed by his experience on the Western Front, developed through the interwar years, and took final shape in the Second World War paintings. It was never a singular, explicit theme, but a changing one that underlay each stage in his career. Nash's personal sense of mortality stemmed from the awareness of the physical fragility of his body. He was often ill as a child, and later wrote of how such illness could cripple life. "Above all, health is everything," he wrote. Illness, particularly his battle with asthma and its potentially lethal symptoms, affected him. As he wrote in a letter to James Thurber, he had an intense hatred of death, but for all that he managed to turn that fear into painterly energy. Nash grew up in a troubled household. His mother suffered from depression, and before he was 10, she was spending long periods in mental institutions. Already a nervous, imaginative boy, the effect of this environment forced him into dark hiding places in the haunted house of his grandfather in Hampshire, where snakes slithered in the grass and large rats ran amok, as well as in the woods near his parents' home, where he could lose himself under the dark canopy of the trees. As a teenager, he was quickly attracted to the work of the Pre-Raphaelites, especially to his fresh-faced ideas of romantic death. In works such as Dante Gabriel Rossetti's Beata Beatrix, in which a long-haired siren is painted at the moment of death, Nash found an innocent outlet for his moody mind. The spell was broken when his mother died in 1910. He was 20. That year, he produced a revealing drawing, Angel and Devil, in which two half-bird, half-human figures battle on a hilltop, accompanied by some of his own poetry. A place of gibbet-shapen trees and black abyss, where gaunt hills brooded dark and evil, girdled by dense woods and rushing streams, a dread place only seen in dreams. Such youthful scribbling did not prepare him for the reality of the First World War. Nash served as an infantry officer in the Ypres salient on the Belgian front in March 1917, only to be invalidated out after several months after he'd sustained injuries falling into a trench. The landscape that Nash had seen defiantly in bloom in the spring was now a barren, placid quagmire, littered with the dead. Only the splintered stumps of trees remained. Although his first exhibition of war pictures later that year was a relatively tame depiction of the conflict, critics such as Roger Fry recognized in Nash's personality a feel for its horrors. "I think you have a very special talent," he wrote to Nash, "for recording a certain poetical aspect of such scene in a way that no other artist could." Fry's instincts were right. When Nash returned to the front as an official war artist to witness the aftermath of the Battle of Passchendaele, what he saw radically transformed both his art and his attitude to death. Nash expressed the death of the man through the death of nature in his chalk sketches. In a letter to his wife Margaret, he described what he saw as apocalyptic. "Evil and the incarnate fiend alone can be the master of the ceremonies in this war. No glimmer of God's hand is seen. Sunset and sunrise are blasphemous mockeries to man. Only the black rain out of the bruised and swollen clouds, or through the bitter black of night, is fit atmosphere in such a land." Like many who experienced war, the rigid fatalism that he had initially felt was no match for the stark realism of the battlefield. When he showed these pictures several months later, he called the exhibition void, as if it were an exhibition about the end of mankind. For many, it would take more than a decade to articulate their experiences of war. Edmund Blunden's undertones of war did not appear until 1928, while Siegfried Sassoon's memoirs of an infantry officer only emerged in 1930. Nash was different. While he spent comparatively little time in active service, its effects showed in his work almost immediately. With Margaret, he moved in 1922 to the small Dorset coastal town of Dymchurch. It was a melancholic place that suited his post-war temperament, and a long grey seawall dotted with blockhouses stretched along the seafront. The flat seashore was studded with groins, like sharp spikes that protruded from the body of the beach. Here Nash studied and sketched the sea, and walked along the seawall at night. During this time he completed an elegy, Winter Sea, the most mournful painting of his career. Many of the elements he had painted in his war works appeared again, but this time flattened and muted. The sickly brown mud that was once the earth now became the flat sky. The beach was bleached to a pale white, and the sun, once blood red, had gone. The sea had been carved up, turning the waves into cold, hard, angular sheets. Later, in 1929, this collectivized depiction of grief was personalized when Nash's father died. As his wife remembered, they were more like brothers than father and son, and the loss deeply affected him. He responded again by depicting death in nature, firstly in February, the title referring to the month in which his father died. It shows a large hand axe embedded in a tree stump, behind which a gate separates a row of living trees from a clump of dead ones. For Nash, trees still represented human beings. The headless, blasted stumps he had painted during the war were now the trees of the English landscape. Felled trees as corpses appeared often in his work, like memories of those who had passed on. They were symbolized in the neat log piles and the rows of tidy trees in the landscape at Iden, as well as in the funeral pyre of wood in his illustration for Sir Thomas Browne's book, Urne Burial. He was more comfortable articulating the style of life and death in nature. The fallen machinery was replaced with floating flowers. They also featured in Monster Field, a painting of a twisted tree, based on his photographs of dead elms, with their great limbs sprawled backwards over the grass, bleached to a ghastly pallor, like the skeletons of soldiers. Nash channeled his loss and the increasing sense of his own mortality through his interest in surrealism and metaphysical art. Influenced by the works of Giorgio de Chirico and Max Ernst, the suggestion of death became a powerful and emotive subject. Windows, doors, and empty rooms materialized in his work, all dark portals to another world. In the painting Harbor and Room, death is symbolized in every plane. in the encroaching sea that invades the floor, in the dark, seductive void of the fireplace, in the featureless sky behind. But this was not a pessimistic work, where before his paintings had suggested death as finality, here was Nash expressing an ambiguity in which the doors and windows pointed towards a more hopeful end. The death of his father coincided with increasing health problems. At the time, asthma was a potentially fatal illness. In 1933, Nash fell seriously ill and almost died from an attack in 1936. The claustrophobic effects of the disease, he spoke of being invaded throughout the day by it, encouraged him towards imagery that looked for an escape into vast lonely spaces and complete freedom of bodily action. His subject matter came to him naturally at the start of the Second World War. Suddenly the sky was upon us like a huge hawk, hovering, threatening. Everyone was searching the sky, expecting some terror to fall. Nash had been fascinated since the Spanish Civil War by the idea of the Rose of Death, the name the Spanish gave to the parachute, and when the threat of an aerial invasion of Britain became the real possibility, he strained his eyes upwards to see the dreadful miracle of the sky blossoming with these floating flowers. The war gave Nash a mental backdrop to explore these ideas, and as an official war artist for the second time, it soon appeared in the falling and wrecked plains littered across the English landscape. In the most dramatic Totes Mer, Dead Sea, which was pictorially and thematically a neat continuation of Winter Sea, the landscape is covered with the wreckage of German planes which have become static and dead. However, despite the powerful symbolism of the painting, Nash ultimately felt more comfortable articulating the cynical nature of death on life through nature, and the fallen machinery was replaced with floating flowers. In an article titled Aerial Flowers, written a year before he died, Nash emphasized the meaning of these airborne images. The great thing is to exercise constantly in the imagining of aerial images, he wrote, probing tentatively, not unlike those incredibly brave engineers who go ahead of the infantry in search of mines, feeling for death every foot. For it is death I have been writing about all this time, and I make no apology for mentioning it. He found his most poetic expression of these aerial images in his final Sunflower series of paintings. While he had painted them first as earthbound objects, they were now rotating discs in the air. In Eclipse of the Sunflower, the petals of the sunflower fused with the burning sun. Painted when he knew his illness was overtaking him, it was a symbolic picture of his own end. But Nash had come to terms with it. An eclipse was the cathartic picture, one that confirmed his faith in the eternal cycle of nature. He knew that the path of his sunflower was towards the sun, the giver of life and the source of light.
Did you like the visit in the Wunderkammer? If you did, please like, subscribe, and share this content if you see it as helpful. Did you also notice the artworks in this video? They're not put accidentally. If you want to understand my philosophical reasons of why I put them in the video, you can become a crow on Patreon. In that tier, I'm posting the paintings and the contacts they have in the video. You can also see them like Easter eggs. But only crows can see through the messages, because they are messengers themselves.
You can also become a raven. In that tier, you can ask me for answers and guidance about anything you're curious about, and you're going to receive a high-quality answer.
I also have playlists on Spotify under my name, Katerina Lunas, if you need something to trigger and enhance your emotional experience. Can you hear the footsteps? They're the footsteps of illusion. It's coming. But what are you going to do about it? Accept it or do something about it?